Okay, can you guys hear me?
Of course.
Good? Okay. Good morning. I'm going to talk to you all today about my belief in the power of one to bring change to the world. As you look through history of the world, you see many people who, despite their circumstances, they stepped out and made a change. Sometimes it was gradual, sometimes it was immediate, but it all started with one. In the 1960s, there was a pastor from Montgomery, Alabama, who decided to take a stand and fight against segregation and the fact that all men are in fact created equal. He overcame his fears and he pushed forward, letting nothing stand in his way, and eventually led a peaceful march that consisted of 250,000 people. One ordinary man rallied 250,000 people to his cause and later achieved his goal of equality. That man was Martin Luther King Jr. He had the courage to step out and achieve a goal that would impact the nation for centuries. Another man who decided he wanted to bring change to the world was Billy Graham. He was born and raised on a dairy farm in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was just a normal guy who wanted to bring change, and he did. He led spiritual crusades and rallies throughout his life, and by the end of his life, by the time he had retired, he had reached out to about 215 million people in over 185 countries. And his organization is still today touching lives. Characteristics these men had in common that I just mentioned is they both had failures in their lives. They both fell, but they kept pushing forward. They persevered when the task became more difficult than they expected, and they committed to a goal no matter what arose. They met the circumstances and achieved. There's also a man who brought great change to this world through prayer. James Dobson Sr. He was a pastor from Shreveport, Louisiana, and one day he committed to fasting lunch and praying for his children to be fruitful, strong Christians. And as they grew up, they all went on to be pastors and missionaries, but one, James Dobson Jr. He was one who didn't go immediately into the ministry. Instead, he went off to California where he obtained a degree in pediatric psychology from USC. And as a result of this, he was looked at as kind of the least of his siblings, the underdog. But he didn't get discouraged or quit. He kept moving forward and later started a ministry by the name of Focus on the Family, which currently has impacted the lives of millions. And it all started with one man praying for his kids. Throughout the Bible, you see people God called upon to bring change. There's Moses, who had poor speech. He led an entire nation out of slavery. Joseph, from the time he was a small boy until he was older, his brothers hated him. They even tried to kill him, but instead sold him to slave traders who sold him to Egypt. And to make a long story short, he became the second most powerful man of Egypt, saved his family and the nation from a horrible famine. David, he was a shepherd boy who was the weakest and smallest of his brothers, yet he went on to become a great king. Esther, who was a poor orphan that lived with her uncle, but she saved thousands of her people from death. So if God can use the weakest of people and rise them up to change a nation, then I know he can use me and he can use you. Of all the lives I've spoken of today, there is one that surpasses all of them, and that is the life of Jesus Christ. Through his life, he changed history like none other. Here is a man who was born in an obscure village, was the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village, worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years, he was an itinerant preacher. He never owned a home. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family. He never went to college. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He never did one thing that usually accompanied greatness. He had no credentials but himself. And while still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. In fact, one of them denied him. He was turned over to his enemies and went through the mockery of a trial. Then he was nailed upon a cross between two thieves, and while he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had on this earth, his coat. Then when he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. Since then, 19 long centuries have come and gone, and today he is the centerpiece of the human race and the leader of common progress. I am not too far off when I say that all the armies that have ever marched, all the navies that were ever built, all the parliaments that ever sat, and all the kings that ever reigned put together have not affected the life of man upon this earth as powerfully as that one solitary life. Personally, he has changed my life and who I am greatly, as well as many of you in this room. And it was just one life that took place thousands of years ago. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the butterfly effect, but it's a theory that simply states that the air from one flap of a butterfly's wings can affect weather patterns halfway across the world and can cause a tornado or even a hurricane. It amazes me to think that something so small can make an impact so big. And really, it's not so different with us. All we have to do is step out, stand up, and bring change. It only takes one.